the garage. Well, you know, it's been about a month since the last Midnight Oil Garage episode, and while that month has been spent working on the 56 Oval project, today we're going to sort of get caught up on that project and just see how we generated all this scrap. For example, the door pillar, you guys saw that already. Quarter panels replaced. Other quarter panel. What was left of the heater channel. Who knows what the rest of this stuff is. Anyway, if we get some time, I'm going to show you a couple tools you can make in your garage for custom body work as well. And maybe we'll end up the episode putting this car back together, and you can take a look at how it's looking at this stage. So stay tuned to the Midnight Oil Garage. Well, this is how she looked almost 9 years ago when we first brought her home. Looked pretty good from the outside, but sure enough, underneath was very, very rough. The heater channels were rotten or non-existent. And all the metal about 6 inches down on the car that connects to those heater channels was totally rotten. So got it in the shop, and once we finally started working on it, tried to faithfully replace all those components. Here's the door pillar on the right hand side. This wasn't as mangled as the other. These are the connections that go down to the heater channels. Under the rear seat area, hand fabricated those parts from scratch, welded them in. Made them a little oversized, and then later we trimmed them to fit. One of the biggest projects was getting the quarter panels in place. Here I've mocked it in place on the side of the car. Aligned it to the bottom of the door. That's one of the most important steps. Scribed a mark and cut out the old metal. Here I'm using a magnet to hold the new quarter panel in place. And tentatively we tack welded it. Checking all door gaps and alignments before fully welding. Of course, this car was so rotten that the areas of the door pillar that connect down to the heater channel were gone as well. These had to be fabricated straight from metal. Did this using a cardboard template and the bandsaw and some creativity. All this was done well before putting a single tack weld onto the heater channel. Once the quarter panels were in on both sides and started to work on the fit and finish of the metal, I decided to go ahead and work on the heater channels themselves. I checked against factory dimensions for the door openings. I used some angle iron and a turnbuckle system inside to brace the car and ultimately to bring the door openings to the correct factory dimension. Once everything was straight, I started at the door pillars with a couple of tack welds, made sure the doors worked well, and then started to finish weld all throughout the vehicle in every factory attachment point. This used all the skills of lap welding, butt welding, and rosette welding. Of course, on the outside of the car there's connection to the heater channels here as well, using rosette welds and butt weld at the end. The front clip was the last thing on our project to go in place. I tacked it in before, and now I fully welded and started to grind the metal down. As a last step, I rosette welded in the floors, had a friend do some grinding, and got the floor pan to the state it's in now. Okay, so you got your dolly on the back side of the panel, and you've got your hammer on the front side of the panel. And you're beating away either on dolly or off dolly, depending on what you want to do. And the problem that you're going to get is you have a very small face on your hammer. You're going to start getting distortions, a lot of dimples. And one of the tools that professionals use, I only learned this recently on YouTube myself, is called a slap hammer. Now a slap hammer, from what I can see, costs about $50 to $60. And what it does is it presents a much larger face, a slightly curved, flat face, against the body panel, and it allows you to bring a much wider area in contact with the hammer at one time. And you can basically, instead of hitting the metal with the hammer, you're slapping it. So, instead of paying $50 or $60, I took the easy way out. I took just a regular pry bar, cost about $1.99 at the local home store. I took a piece of 1/8" steel that I had lying around, cut it to about 4 inches, 4.5 inches by 2 inches wide, rounded the edges, welded it together, and I made myself a slap hammer. So, I know what you're saying. You know, if you work in a body shop and you're using the tool all day, maybe it makes sense to spend the money, but this is something I'm not going to use very much. It was a trial entry. I thought, what the heck? I'm going to make it. I'm going to see if it works. I've been really pleased with the results, and you never know. If I see the proper tool on sale one day, I'm going to buy it. But this is a good way to save some money and get yourself working on the car instead of putting money in the bank waiting until you can buy that tool. That's a slap hammer for you. Duckbill pliers. Very, very common in the home heating, ventilation, air conditioning trade. These can bend sheet metal on a straight line beautifully, usually for really thin sheet metal like ductwork. But there's a couple of instances when you're working on a car in a tight space and you need to bend metal in situ, and this is a great tool to have. The only problem is, all it is a pair of vice grips or locking pliers with a couple pieces of steel welded into the jaws. Works like this. Put it on a piece of metal, clamp it down, and bend, and you get a nice straight line. Okay? So, $21, $22, $23 for a small pair, or $1.99 for some cheap locking pliers, $0 for some scrap steel to put in the jaws, cut it to shape on your bandsaw, weld it right to the jaw, and you get yourself a pair of perfect locking pliers, duckbill pliers. So give that one a try. The whole idea here is to be creative, open your mind up. If there's a tool that you want that you can't get, maybe you can make it. If it works for me, it'll work for you. A dolly is a heavy cast iron piece of steel to hold against the backside of your panel as you're hammering on it. It allows you to stretch the metal and bring the metal close to where it needs to be. Normally they have a very flat surface. It's a surface that you should keep tidy by sanding and polishing. It should be absolutely smooth. But what do you do when you've done a lap weld like we did a couple episodes ago and you have a protruding thickness of sheet metal? If you were to rest your dolly on that piece and hammer from the other side, you're going to wind up pushing that thickness of sheet metal out and distorting the panel. So I tried something out. I'm not sure that it's commonly accepted or it's the right thing to do, but I took one of these dollies. They cost about $3.99 at the local Chinese parts store, and I took an angle grinder to it and I ground out just about the thickness of this protrusion. So now this part will sit over top of the lap, allow me to beat it flat from the other side, and it's not going to make this lap weld protrude. I'm not sure it's the right way to do it, but you know what? It worked for me. Just goes to show you, if you've got an idea, you may as well try it. You never know. Might be the next best thing. I'm in my quest to perfectly smooth out those quarter panels on the 56 without using body filler. I did like you've done, and I went to YouTube and I started looking up stretching and shrinking metal. Did lots of Google searches on it because I'm learning all this stuff myself. And I found out about a really neat tool called a shrinking disc. It turns out that when you're working on sheet metal of any kind and you're working away with your hammer and your dollies and you're pounding it and beating on it, you're always going to stretch the metal a little bit beyond where you need to be. And once you've stretched the metal, it's quite difficult, or at least it used to be quite difficult, to shrink it back. There's some time-honored techniques like heating it up with a torch, allowing it to expand, and then using a wet rag to cool it off in a hurry. That seems to snap the steel back to its original state, and it's a good technique to use when you're, for example, trying to take an oil can pop out of a large panel. But what about the real fine work? When you've got a bunch of dimples, a bunch of high spots, and you want to bring them all level. Well, there's a neat tool, like I mentioned, called the shrinking disc. And what the shrinking disc does is it goes on your angle grinder. It rotates very, very quickly on the angle grinder, and it's a smooth steel or stainless steel surface that just touches off on all the high spots, all the dimples. It heats them up really, really hot. Then you take a wet rag and cool them really quickly, and you shrink the metal back down, bringing it a little bit flatter. And you continue this process using a ball peen hammer to bring out the low spots from behind, and again going over it with the shrinking disc, and you can get really amazing results. There are guys that are absolute experts on this, and I certainly am not one. I am an absolute novice. The other problem is I needed to get this thing done in a hurry. I wanted to start working on it. I was excited, and I needed to mail order a shrinking disc. But I thought, you know what? I could probably make something that'll work almost as well as a proof of concept and get me working on the car, and if I like it, then I'm going to order one up. And that's what I did, and maybe you'll want to too. So you've probably seen one of these. It's a backing plate for sandpaper on an angle grinder. Get yourself one of these from the local store and get yourself some sheet metal, and what you can do in short order is make yourself a shrinking disc. This is just a plastic sanding backing disc. Some 18 gauge sheet metal I had lying around. I cut it into a circular shape, drilled a hole in the middle, put the bung back down on it. I actually put this on the belt sander for a little bit just to get it absolutely smooth, and I started using it on the car, and you know what, it works really well. So let's see how it looks. So believe you me, I am an absolute novice at this, starting to learn some techniques to get this joint that I've made in this quarter panel absolutely smooth. So I've made my slapping hammer, I've got a ball peen, I've worked from behind and started to bring the really low spots out just by bumping them out with a ball peen so they protrude on this side. Then I've taken a dolly and my slapping hammer and worked it down until I get it relatively smooth, still with some high spots. And then using the shrinking disc, I let it stop on the metal. I'm in the Great White North. I didn't have a wet rag handy, but there's lots of snow. So I just rubbed that over the area. That cools down the metal that's just stretched a little bit, and it brings those high spots just a little bit tighter. It's getting really, really smooth. It's a painstaking process. I've got hours of work still to do, but I need to start marking off all my low spots, bumping them out, and eventually I'm really confident from what I've learned I can get this absolutely smooth. So my suggestion, order yourself up a proper safe shrinking disc from the manufacturers that make it. Just look on YouTube or look on Google. But if you want a proof of concept, you want to try it, you can do it like I did for a couple of bucks, and it does the job. Well, I promised a special treat today, and here we are. The body's come a long way in a month, the frame too. And though there's a lot of work left to do, many, many hours, this is going to go away now and be moved aside for some other projects, just the same way that you guys probably do in your shops. So, the moment of truth is here. Set this thing down on a couple of stands, and I'm going to roll the pan underneath and see how close we came. Needs a lot of work, that's for sure. Need to do some alignment, bring it back up where it needs to be, but you know what? For the first time in 9 years, this car is together. It's going to come apart about 100 more times and go back together about 100 more times, but you know what? This is pretty fulfilling. A month ago, this thing was nothing more than a wreck, and well, I've got a box of parts. I've got a box of parts like this to show you the kind of work that we've done. So I'm pretty proud to say that the 56 Oval is well on its way, and the Midnight Auto Garage, we're going to be back working on it soon. But you know what? Summer season's coming, camping's coming. That means I got to get the campers ready for the season. So until next time, get out to your garage and burn the midnight oil.